So Nitano had some time with us on Monday, but Emma comes into this quite fresh. And when I briefed Emma, I spoke particularly from the perspective of an absent father. And I mean, Emma, you can maybe just give us some quick, like a synopsis in 3 minutes quickly. And then we can maybe draw out some of the stuff from what you're saying, because we are looking specifically at the third point that came out of the statement that was made earlier this year in June or July, when we were looking at the issue around family values, and how the church focuses a lot on traditional family values, and the power differentials are not acknowledged. And the sanctity of families takes precedence over the sanctity of the lives of women. And then those who identify as LGBTQI+. So we have Emma, who's really going to give us some input there. And then we also had the feedback from one of Charmaine's nieces, I think. And then in terms of the LGBTQI+ community, we've got Nitano. So that's where we're at. And I know that we're not going to be able to do more than that, unless we run out of stuff to say. But that has not been the case with this group. We have a lot to say in this group. So are you good with that, Tim?
All good. I'm settled.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great stuff. So welcome, everyone. And Emma, I'm going to hand over to you.
Okay, thanks, Reverend. So, good morning, church. Good morning, my fellow panel speakers. My name's Emma and Nitano. I used to occasionally visit St. Philip's, and I know Reverend Natalie because she was my Rev in high school. And she's become a great friend to me ever since. And she asked me to chat about this topic that we have before us today, which is family values as they are outlined in the church, particularly how traditional values are used to sort of preferred male members of the family, and also how it can be how this valuing of traditional values can be to the detriment of members of the church when it affects, in the way that it affects women, people who identify as women, and also members of the LGBTQI+ community. So Reverend has asked me to speak specifically about how these traditional values, and how I would like to call it the idea of the nuclear family, sort of affects how families' lived realities, especially when there's an absent father that's present, sort of makes it difficult for you to marry these traditional church values and also these lived realities of women. So yeah, that's where I'm going to start off today. I think my main starting point is that what is a traditional value of the church? I remember growing up and going to Sunday school, I was always told that the man is the head of the household and the woman is the neck. And often that was used as a way to sort of, I don't want to say the word oppress, but basically cement this idea that women are, to a certain degree in the family unit, supposed to defer to the man or serve the man, which is not an interpretation my family and I agreed with, because I grew up in a household which was run by a single mother and I had an absent father. So for me, it always felt like I was sort of out of place, or I didn't belong in the church community, or I was always seen as like a achshay man, like, poor, my mom's name is Michelle, poor Michelle, you know, she just has to do her best. And it sort of reinforces this idea that you are lacking something in your family, or that you don't, not that you don't belong, but there's always this idea of like pity rather than acknowledging someone's lived reality, which results in often women, especially in my family, with my brother having to take up the role of a dad quite young, and my sister stepping up to the plate because they're much older than me to assist my family, sort of entrenching these gender-based roles that actually don't allow children to be children. And it also gives mothers a sense of responsibility that whatever they're doing is never going to be right because they don't have a man to do something, you know. And even though mothers do their best and they put under this extra pressure, it still always feels like, I'm a single mother, or I don't have a dad that's involved in my life. So I either need to overcompensate, or I need to make sure I'm not like a dropout, or I need to make sure my children aren't drug addicts. Because as soon as you come from this idea of a non-traditional, non-nuclear family or broken home, as people often say, then it's almost associated with women having this extra responsibility to step up and govern and be mom and dad. And then at the same token being told, don't act too much like a man, don't take on too much responsibility, and still kind of places people's worth, or women's worth, I think, on having a male role model figure or finding a man that's equally yoked to you to sort of fix this brokenness. And in my opinion, I don't think that I am broken, or I come from a broken family, because I had an absent father and I was raised by a single mother. And it took me a while to get to sort of come to terms and realize that, because it's not something we associate as the norm. The majority of people in the churches that I was a member of, and my mom and I went to, and my brother and sister went to, most of them were predominantly single mothers. You know, it wasn't that these traditional family values were the norm in the church, if you looked at it, the practical stance. So sort of wrapping your head around that and moving from this culture of, oh dear, to this culture of acceptance and support, and using the church as your community of support rather than as a mechanism to judge or say, shame, or provide pity, for me was a very important part of my adolescence, but also just coming to terms with the fact of my relationship with my father, because at the end of the day, it is quite difficult to marry this idea of having an absent father and this idea of this omnipresent God that loves you and is your father and is always there for you, because you don't have a practical example of it necessarily. And you're told, almost to a certain extent in my experience, that because you don't have this tangible example of a father, you need to look for it everywhere or keep everyone up to the standard of God, which is going to result in people, for example, letting you down and so on. So I would say, in summary, that for me, these traditional family values, or this idea of a nuclear family as being preferential or right, just results in more responsibility being put on matriarchs to conform to this matriarchal role that they put in, and to have this assertion of being a strong, independent single mother and not asking for help or leaning on the church for support. And then it also makes women and boys have to step up to the plate too soon, and girl children as well, or feel that they don't have support, or that they need to actually overcompensate, or just feel like there's something wrong, and this idea of broken, that their family is broken and therefore they have to make up for it, and sort of marry their that disparity and their challenges without actually being able to talk about it, because it's still sort of taboo or shame or pity sort of thing. So yeah, that's what I would have to say on that topic, Rev.
Thank you, Emma. That's given us a lens into who you are and how you feel, and your very strong views about this. So I'm wanted to just put out to the rest of the panel, and Nitano, you must give input as well. You are not only here for a specific topic. Just to hear from you, if that is your feeling, if that is your experience of the church, and maybe to interrogate it a bit more. And then, we're going to take our lead from Timothy, if that's all good with you, Tim.
Yeah, that's all good, Reverend. Morning, everyone. Thank you for sharing that, Emma. I maybe just want to unpack those sort of three areas that you mentioned. Absent father, you have to keep to the standard of God, if paraphrased very quickly, more responsibility on matriarchs, and then women and boys need to step up sooner. I mean, one could almost put that theme around, wrap that in a theme of expectation. And and this is something that we've actually been discussing. This was actually in our last panel discussion, where we said that there's a lot of expectation that's created based on what society tells us, based on what the church tells us, and even based in our family environment. What do you think the changes to the norm should be, just with regards to managing expectations? It doesn't have to be across society, family, and it doesn't have to be that clinical. Just based on your experience, how do you think we should approach managing our expectations so that it is more in line with what's really going on?
Thanks, Tim. I think that's a brilliant summary, and I really like the way you conceptualized my contribution in this relationship of, or summing it up in terms of this idea of expectation. Because I think ultimately how we manage expectations is how we deal with how we feel after those expectations are laid down, which is ultimately disappointment. And for me, I always, from my own experience, I always felt that either I was disappointed in my circumstances because of the standard, or I saw people in my family being disappointed that it's almost unfair when you compare it to other people's walks of life, obviously not knowing their stories. So I would say in my family, how we sort of mitigated it when we were much older was more by actually not putting things under the rug and saying, okay, we'll just hold a blink and door for now and, cup on and do what we have to do. But rather think about it as, okay, I'm not just going to prescribe to a certain gender role, which is ultimately what I think this traditional value thing does, when that head and neck scripture is interpreted in a certain way. And rather move from this culture of expectation, like you said, to a culture of communication and reasons. I know that sounds a bit lawyery with my reasons and whatnot, but that's ultimately how you wrap your head around it and understand the other person's perspective to get them a holistic picture. Because this whole idea, I would say, using my family as a practical example once more, is because my mom had to be mom and dad, or my brother had to be the de facto father, it resulted in, I'm telling you this and this must just happen. And then these gender roles were placed on particularly my older sister and myself, because there was that lacking or that disappointment or that expectation that now resulted, So I would say communication, and rather seeing it as you get this role because you are X, or you identify as X, or you are born in a certain order, to rather having it be, we have a job to do, we have to grow, we have to look after each other. What makes the most practical sense for us as a family? Not what other people think, not what necessarily only how we feel, but use how we feel to come up with practical solutions that make everyone feel valued and not disappointed. That's what I would say.
If the church were to take the lead on this topic, Emma, what do you think the pragmatic steps could be to help with the carrying of the burden around these expectations? What can the church do to kind of lighten that load, especially for someone that's been in your experience? What would you like to see? The church has got a lot of power. It's got a lot of responsibility. It can take the lead on these sort of things. What did you wish upon the church in terms of managing these expectations and making the load lighter for other young people and other single moms and other families?
I would say the steps that I would have to be, that I would think would have to be taken or adopted by the church is linked also to how I conceptualize the idea of church, or what I would like the church to be. For me, my understanding of the Bible, especially the New Testament, and Jesus's preachings and the 11th commandment he gave about love your neighbor as you love yourself, is ultimately that the church is a community. Yes, it has power, that's inherent. Yes, it has a history of being associated with implementing laws and so on, which gives us this authority that even subliminally we have in our minds. If we conceptualize church as community and see it rather as a place of judgment or pity, and rather as a community where you're part of and you feel accepted, I feel like that will be a huge step in making it easier for people to be honest about their circumstances, honest about their expectations, but also encourage a dialogue that makes people learn and unlearn their conceptions or their judgments or their inclinations towards pity, which sort of strengthen this idea of disappointment. And instead of doing that by having this community, you are able to manage expectations because you hear other people's expectations. And instead of questioning why am I the odd one out, you think of, I actually fit in here because of X. And if you have the sense of feeling of belonging, you don't feel like, oh, I must prescribe to this nuclear family or traditional family value, for example. You think, I belong. And if someone feels like they belong in a church, half the battle's won, in my opinion, considering the history of the church and how people are often divided by religion, or even in Christianity by denominations, rather look at what we have in common and say, we are a family as a church in ourselves. And we have sub-families that are in different shapes, colors, sizes, orientations, identities. And that just makes it more beautiful. It doesn't make it broken. Because when you look at the kaleidoscope, for example, you don't think, oh, look, there's broken pieces of glass. Sis. You think, oh, look how the light touches that. And we are supposed to be that light to the world. We need to accept how the world and how God's light shines through us, which is as we are, shattered, jagged, broken, whole, traditional, or not. What's good for you is good for you. How you come as you are.
I'm so glad you mentioned that aspect about being different. And I actually read somewhere, with everything happening, especially in South Africa, and then our brothers and sisters in Nigeria at the moment, and all of that, someone just kind of just posted there, just briefly, and they said, it's funny how we get so caught in we don't celebrate our differences. We constantly at loggerheads about our difference, like I'm black, I'm white, I'm colored, I'm this, I'm that. It's like, we never celebrating it. We never, and so often other parts of the world look at places like South Africa and our democracy, for example, and they envy it. They envy because, it's like a state that's just run by a government and you can't speak in certain areas. As I said, now we just look across our border, not too far away, and it's crazy what's happening, and yeah, it's thank you for raising that. It's like we don't celebrate our diversity enough, and I think the church is a microcosm of that, so thank you, Emma. I don't know if there's anyone else that wants to pose questions or anything else on someone's mind or wanting to contribute.
I'd like to contribute, touching on the question, what can the church do? For me today, it took me time that I was asked that question, what can we do, and the person I spoke to is of an influential, just one of the new South African influencers that's up and coming. My suggestion to that person was use your platforms that you have available. And the other thing was that I think at St. Philip, and I have to commend Natalie, the platform has been set. We've been using this platform now, I think it's our third month. And Natalie, I think it's because of you and allowing us that platform. The other thing is, one of the questions that you mentioned on the chat was, what must the church do? The liturgy has to be changed. I'm not quite sure how we have to change the liturgy and what to do, but I do remember a conversation of Monday night that I made a note here somewhere that there is somewhere, I can't remember where, that we can actually anonymously, Natalie, you mentioned, and I'm thinking, I feel that is what I want to do. I want to that because there's the bishop standing in Wales Street with his posters and all these supporting clergy with their posters, no to GBV. But what are they doing? They're saying no to GBV, but when do they change the liturgy? It's okay, it's all well and good to say no to GBV, but what are you really doing about it? Standing with a poster, thank you for that. But we need to take a step higher than that. And the same with what Nitano mentioned on Monday night. It's like it's accepted, but there's no change being made, and that is the important part. The change needs to be made, and the step has to be taken, and it's got to be taken from the top. So yeah, that was just that question about what can the church do, what can the community do? Because once again today yesterday and today, I'm not sure if you guys have followed, about two prominent leaders in the burqa. And I had a discussion with someone because someone that this is the influencer that I was speaking to, he was very touched by this whole thing, and he's Muslim, and he's like, Shemaine, what do I do? And I said, use your platforms, because it's platforms like we having here at St. Philip that I think is really just it's opening doors to people coming forward and speaking. And I think that young lady that came forward and spoke, she spoke because she sees other people speaking up. And that is what we do. We need to create more platforms, and we need to change the liturgy.
Thank you, Charmaine. Nitano, good day. When last we spoke, you mentioned something around on the topic of change, actually, level of intentionality.
Yeah.
Let's say levels of intentionality.
Sure.
And I just kind of backtracking now with what Charmaine said, guy standing there with a poster, and like, are we scared in the church? Are we, funnily enough, we shouldn't be fearful. We serve God. But around the topic of church leadership and not being pragmatic or not being intentional, what's stopping us? What's stopping us from making changes, policy changes, scriptural changes? Like, what are the blockages?
Thanks, Tim. I firstly thank you, Emma. I mean, that was brilliant. I just sent you a copy of our application form so that you can join my parish. But on a just in response to your question, Tim, what is stopping us? I think I'm fairly new, right? So there's an Afrikaans saying that says die nuwe biesems vee altyd die beste. So I'm energized. I'm there. I'm on the scene. I think I was at that march. I'm not in the pictures though. But what I think is blocking a lot of our clergy from doing anything really is the fact that we are still very inward looking. The clergy have become very parochial in their thinking. So all they are concerned about, or we are concerned about, is my little congregation and what is happening in front of me here. So we are very preoccupied with church politics, and keeping the lights on and the water running. And there's a massive disconnect with what is happening in the world at large, really. And so the church is I think I heard someone a few weeks ago call it navel gazing. We're kind of looking downwards into our own stomachs, and we don't even know we're not aware of what's happening around us. Emma mentioned, or was it Charmaine now that mentioned, the standing up with placards on the sides of Wales Street and in front of the cathedral. And that is amazing, that's good. But is it enough? Obviously not. The programs of the church, and I mean, that in itself is again in Afrikaans, 'n uitdaging. It's a challenge because the church doesn't have sufficient programs. No, we leave it to Hope Africa. That's the social responsibility arm of the Anglican Church, and they will deal with the GBV issues. They will deal with the addressing of poverty alleviation. They'll deal with the issues of human sexuality, for argument's sake. And that's not solely the responsibility of a department somewhere in an office. The church, and I loved how Emma said this, we need to reconceptualize our understanding of what church is, because we are still stuck in this patriarchal concept of what the church is, and we are waiting for someone in an office with a purple shirt to give us the directives and the direction, when in fact the hands and the feet of Christ is in the parish, is in the local church, are the families, however they look and whatever they look like. And so I think a big challenge for the clergy and for church leadership in general is to stop being so parochial in their thinking and to expand how they interact with the world. Even just talking about church programs is already something that is almost non-existent in the church itself, because a lot of our churches are just Sunday heavy, and we are focused on giving people a word for the week, and that's it. That's where it stops. But we don't give them the tools with which to help them live out their faith from Monday to Saturday, so that we can refuel them on the Sunday, or when, however we do that. So yeah, just in response to that, I think that's maybe the challenge.
I love the way, and it's quite interesting, these two juxtaposed ideas, right? The life of Jesus, revolutionary for his time, and even still today, really, like, Jesus was going against the grain in a big way. He made many guys sit back and eyebrows kind of say, hey, what's this guy doing? He's challenging the norm. In an uncomfortable space, very uncomfortable spaces, really putting himself out there. We model ourselves with the life of Jesus, although we've created these systems which are actually quite far removed from being uncomfortable, wearing your heart on your sleeve type of thing, being almost clinical at times, in terms of a cookie cutter, this is the way we're going to do things. Meanwhile, the world is changing. The world is changing so fast at lightning speed. Emma is a testimony to how fast the world is changing, the family structure. And it just seems like, we're trying to force this thing into this hole, this thing called church, but we're not actually realizing that, the shape has changed. And we need to change our approach in order to kind of fit and be relevant in that regard. So yeah, it's kind of scary, but it's also an opportunity, I guess, right, Nitano? It's a massive opportunity to be relevant.
Yes, Tim, I agree with you, and I really fear that if the church continues on the road that it is, the church is, I mean, we can all acknowledge the church is slowly but surely losing its relevance. What Archbishop Tutu would have called its prophetic voice. We were once an institution that could speak out against injustices. I'm talking about the South African context. But a big part of I think our failure of the church in South Africa is that post 1994, we just kind of threw in the towel and we said, okay, we won the battle against apartheid, so now we can relax. And so now issues of the family comes to the fore, and we kind of don't want to ruffle our feathers because we did our part. We can now just be church. And as you say, we are challenged to. The church mustn't be the glass within which the water is poured. The church must be the water. Society is the glass that kind of holds us together, but the church must be the water. So we must change shape. We must be fluid. We must be able to adapt to the challenges that are presented to us. I like how Charmaine was talking about, when are we going to change our liturgies? We would, again, it takes us back to the apartheid thing. We were too busy fighting apartheid to change our liturgies, because that's when the big, if you look at our prayer book in the Anglican Church, it was constructed in 1989, and it hasn't changed for more than 30 years. I know that process is happening now, but again, are we engaging the right people, or is it a committee or a commission sitting around a table somewhere making those decisions for the wider church? That process should be widespread and should really impact things like How do we have, healing services for women who are abused? How do we receive into the church people who've transitioned, from one gender expression to another? That is not included. That's not included in our vocabulary. And I think as a church, we really should be open to change. Really, I mean, it's as simple as that, really. But I think we are still really stuck in the patriarchal understanding of what it means to be church in the world.
And just the thing that was interesting, I mean, I've been reading up quite a lot on the psychology of what people have been going through during COVID, and you just see people sharing, expressing themselves on things like social media, and people have been looking for answers since March here in South Africa. They have literally been like wanting answers. Spiritually, they've needed filling up. Spiritually, they have not been themselves. People have been losing jobs. People have been dying. I almost think it's been an amazing time to spread the word of God. There couldn't have been a better time to actually be the light and show people a different way, or show them the way of Christ, basically. I mean, some people may say, what's this guy on about? But I honestly do believe, like, it's in our time of need, it's in our time of, like, really, how do we deal with this, that Christ calls us closer to him. I don't know, any other thoughts? Reverend Natalie?
I was going to say that, you hit the nail right on the head, Timothy, when you said people were really looking for something. And it's been amazing just to see how we've been able to engage the church during COVID. I mean, that was, who in their right mind thought that the Archbishop was going to meet with these bunch of women who wrote a statement to him, and he would agree. Could you imagine if it wasn't COVID? Trying to even get to meet with the Archbishop in that kind of way would have been impossible because of his diary commitments. But we were able to do that. And I just read today, the rector of the college actually informed us that Reverend June Major had come to the college and had come to pray at the chapel there. And I don't think that a lot of what is going on right now in church politics, even just for us at St. Philip's, who would have thought we'd been able to have these conversations in this way if it wasn't for COVID? And I think we need to be listening to the voice of God. It is a time for us for the world to step back, to almost, take some time out. It wasn't a year. We didn't let the land lay fallow for a whole year, but there were certainly opportunities during COVID when we saw the world taking a breath, but also just stepping back and saying, what have we done? And how do we undo this? How do we undo this, and how do we make it better economically, socially, racially, on every level? And not only in South Africa, worldwide. This has been an opportunity for us to reflect and to really listen to what God is asking us to be at this time in the world. So yeah, I want to see, I think Eugene had a question for Emma. I just want to follow up on that, if that's okay with you, Tim.
Yeah, sure.
Hi there, evening, thanks. Everyone. Emma, just a question on what you shared around the boys having to take up responsibility at a very early stage, because it's something which I can identify with. And I just like to know, because if you are the most senior or the oldest boy, then it falls on you in a female-headed household to ensure that the younger siblings are all towing the line. And if they get into trouble, you are the one who has to stand and explain why it happens. And so I just like to check whether you've ever sat down with your brother and whether he's ever explained how that made him feel. Because you are held as the eldest, you are held as the head of the household because you are a male, and yet you don't have any real powers to enact what you know, because you know you're going to take the brunt of whatever comes your way because of the younger siblings, but you are never able to really act because they can straight out tell you, you're not my father. So just a question on whether your brother has ever shared.
Hi, Eugene. Nice to virtually meet you. Yes, many times. I'm a late lamaki. My brother and sister are 7 and 8 years older than me. And my mom would always tell her friends or people at the church, oh, yes, he's the dad when I go away for work, but when I come back, he's my son. And that was always a recurring motif. And he would take me to school. He would do everything. He still took me to varsity last year. Like, if I needed someone, I'd call him. Like, please help, you know, and we always have each other's backs at siblings. But because of the age gap and your positionality, that's an inevitability. That's exactly what you're saying. And that's what I was hinting at in my brief discussion. And it's something where you can see, this is when I refer back to that disappointment and those expectations, because it ultimately results in resentment. And not to say my brother hates me or resents me or my sister or my mother per se, but there definitely have been instances where you can see the impact that's had on him and his trust in other women. The responsibility he always carries, and it weighs heavy on him. You know, you can see it, because even though he's our big brother, at the end of the day, he was the de facto father, you know, for a long time. And you'll never shake that. For example, I was in a car accident a few weeks ago, and the first thing I did was message my siblings and say, okay, I'm fine. Here's the picture of the car, I'm all right. He started WhatsApping me and I didn't respond because I was busy on the phone calling insurance. He went straight to father mode like that. Why aren't you answering me? I just want to know you're safe. And then I was like, hey, Lam, bruh, I'm on the phone. I'm trying to handle my business here, you know? And then he goes back to brother mode. Okay, sorry. You know? So it's not that he's crazy or anything, because I always tell my friends, hey, my brother could be picking up, my dad could be picking me up from a party or something. You don't know, you know? And it's just because it's so ingrained and inherent, that level of responsibility. So definitely what you're saying. And then also just to add on to what Nitano and Charmaine said and what Tim and Rev also mentioned, just about speaking about policy decisions in creating change, and not just your attitudes in the community. I think the important point to maybe also mention is that the constituency of those people who are making those decisions has to change. If you want policies to reflect your church, people reflecting your church need to make those decisions. Because unfortunately, we cannot speak on behalf of someone else. We can only walk in our own shoes and bring that person and that to the table. Which is why in answering your question, Eugene, I can only say what I've seen in his behavior. I can't speak for him, you know? He's still my brother, he still loves me, but at the end of the day, when it came to enforcing or policy making, he wasn't me, you know? And I think that practical example is also how we can see how the church has taken a bit of a patriarchal role, or the role of an elder brother to step up too quickly and tattletale on everyone and make sure everyone's okay, to answer and make sure everyone's right. But at the end of the day, the people, the constituency, the brothers and sisters answering to him don't have the same positionality as him. The same way he doesn't have the same positionality over, and that not burdens, but sort of is the lens through which our policy must be made. And the only way to get a more coherent lens is to have more people from different backgrounds contributing to that bigger picture. So thank you for your question, Eugene.
Can I just make a comment now? Like, Emma, I've known you since grade 8. Like, you are like a lawyer in the making. You're like right there in my I want to take this moment and just like, say how very proud I am of you.
Thanks, Rev.
Also, maybe just to add on the point of the church needing to change its liturgy and its approach. The one thing, and we had a discussion in the week that came out strongly, is the language that we use in church. And we were made aware that language has power because it has the power to separate. And it can also, it also has the power to put you in a box. So we need to be very, very conscious and make a concerted effort to use inclusive language. And it's we use exclusive language by default, but we really need to become more inclusive in our use of language, then we think we are right. And when people point out to us that hey, you're not using inclusive language, we tell you, but why? They understand what I'm trying to say, and we need to move away from that also, I think.
One of the other things I also just wanted to pick up on was was related to your question, Eugene, because there's so many young men, and Emma, you can only obviously speak from your experience, but there have been times when young men have just stepped back and said, like, this is not my space. Like, it's so unfair. Why am I being asked to do this? I'm following the series on TV right now called Party of Five, which is a group of a family of immigrants, right? And the older brother's just left while the parents have been deported, and he's left to take care of his siblings, and he has no clue. And he has all these new ideas, but his parents are calling from Mexico saying, no, that's not how you should do it. And there's this clash. And we can almost see it play out in our families as well. Our families, I remember my dad saying, this is who you must bank with. This is the bank. This is the best bank, and you must bank with them. And we went and banked with a different banker. It was like you were being disrespectful to your father because he knew all about these things. But you did the numbers and you checked the interest rates or whatever, and you're like, no, but actually, this doesn't work. And that's hard, I think, just in families, especially in our communities. When I say that, I mean, where everyone in our family gets a say in what you do. You don't just discuss it. You don't just make this decision for yourself. You make the decision for your family. Like, how is it going to impact them? So everyone has a say. We know what it's like. You look at weddings, you look at funerals. Everyone must be consulted. Because if you don't do it the way the family expects, then there's going to be problems. So yeah, we've been molded and shaped in a certain way, and it's really difficult to undo some of those layers because we know now and we're seeing now that it wasn't good for all of us. All the ways we've been raised, not all of them have worked well for us. Timothy, are you back?
I'm back. It's my charger. Emma, just I wonder if I can just go back quickly to the example you used of your brother. And sorry that you were in an accident. I hope everything's okay. And we will pray for you in that regard. With the topic of gender-based violence, something that we've been also chatting about in this forum, in this group, within our fellowship, praying into, is trying to understand this violent nature that men have, okay? Especially in South Africa. We've spoken a little bit about the socioeconomics around, women in the employment place, earning salaries, in some instances higher than men these days, and that resulting in power dynamics. Some instances where young boys grow up without their fathers and they don't really have role models. But as you've mentioned now, in the instance of your brother, I mean, is a great example that it can go the other way as well. What do you think is at play here? If we just consider the violence, men towards women and children in South Africa, and where do you think this evil is coming from?
Firstly, I'd like to start with how we conceptualize GBV. Yes, it is evil, but we need to stop labeling it as evil and see it as a perpetrator inflicting violence on a victim, in my opinion, or survivor, I should rather say, because we're intentional with our words, a survivor. So I would say that because an act of GBV is intentional, it links inherently to power dynamics. And power dynamics is really linked to how we express and communicate with each other, not verbally necessarily. So it links once again to how your positionality, for example, and your experiences lead to certain expectations or disappointments that make you act in a certain way. Because about the issue of gender-based violence and how, while it is an effect of the circumstances of, let's say, the perpetrator or the victim, for depending on the incident, it's also due to the way society is constructed. And society is constructed in a patriarchal manner, which means either women are victims of GBV because they conform to the patriarchal structure of society in a sense that they have less power than men, physically, financially, influenced in their communities, or it's the converse, where the woman is more powerful and the man feels intimidated and acts on that. So I would say it ultimately relates to power relations. And which is why there isn't a hard and fast rule for saying GBV is committed by X kind of person, which is why I say it's rather a perpetrator and a survivor that should be used to conceptualize this, and not just an evil. It's an evil in our society and it's a reality, but we should stop conceptualizing this thing that it's this other thing, man, that it's not actually what it is. And what it is, it's real. It's not the evil thing, it's what's happening only. It's not just something that we can say is evil, or it's more than that, because it's linked to people's autonomy, it's linked to power relations, and it has a huge influence. And also to just talk about, like I said, I can't speak except from my experience, but when I've been in situations, like I shared with the congregation last time I spoke, about being harassed or being sexually assaulted or something, in all of those instances, my brother, who turned out okay, wanted to do something about it, And that's what I mean by saying it's about this learning and unlearning and your positionality and power relations. Because even though my brother was, in a typical sense, in a patriarchal society, better off than I was, he still didn't find reason to condone the actions of those perpetrators of violence against his sisters. And not just his sisters, and women in general, So that's why I think being a feminist isn't just linked to being a woman. And being anti-GBV doesn't just mean you side with women or there's a certain perception of the activist,
Gotcha.
It's more considering it's a choice on how we react to that in order to change that. For example, my brother deciding enough is enough and taking a stand. You know what I mean? So I think that's how we can maybe, I don't know if we can solve it, to use that word, but that's how we should conceptualize it, that it starts with you.
I like the practical approach you've taken on that one. And also linking back to what you said earlier on when we were speaking about changes in the church and the constituencies. Because that's a structural change which plays out as power dynamics, and enforces actually the narrative, because the narrative is another form of the power dynamics that we've been discussing, in the group. Reverend Natalie, I don't know if you want to use this as a segue for some of the other items.
Yes, thank you, Tim. And thank you, Emma. You have, you've ignited some further discussion. So I want to take this opportunity and just move from the family role, but not unrelated to the family role. One of the things we've realized as we look at the church in a critically, is to say, the liturgy is there, we need to change it, but we've also hearing and we're seeing more and more that, mothers are bringing, it's the mothers and the children who are sitting in churches. And then we need to acknowledge, that there is a whole community out there that the church has almost tried to avoid. And that's the LGBTQI plus community. And how do we, we discussed this on Monday evening. We said, the people on the ground are a lot more welcoming of the communities that are on the margins, as opposed to the clergy or the people who are leading our churches and are leading our places of worship. And so I'm wondering, Nitano, if you want to share a little bit more around your thoughts around that aspect. We've got, the church has got these committees, like we said, human sexuality, gender-based violence, Green Anglicans, so forth, safe churches. But what are we saying about the communities that are being neglected because of the choices that they're making, partly because of family dynamics and where they find themselves in this family called the church?
Thank you, Reverend. Perhaps maybe even to latch on to what Emma mentioned. She was saying, a lot of the challenges we are facing now is fundamentally power dynamics. It's power play, and this is not foreign in the church at all. And again, we ask ourselves the question: who are sitting around those tables when they are discussing issues of GBV, of human sexuality? Who controls the narrative? And I think largely in the church, which is still largely patriarchal, the conversations are still being led predominantly by the male figures. And so in a conversation like the one we're having now on human sexuality, I think there's a big disconnect between those who are seated at those tables in terms of decision making and policy making, and what's happening on the ground. And I think one of the ways that could be corrected is by actually engaging the people who are involved in all of this. So when we have our human sexuality commissions, are we even talking to gay and lesbian and trans and bisexual people? Are they at any point in the conversation included? And I think that is one of the big challenges in the church, because when we talk about issues like the environment, like GBV, climate change, etc., we are not talking to the specialists, or we are not talking to the people that this actually involves. We're having these in-house conversations, which latches again onto what I said earlier on about us navel gazing, and we kind of don't look beyond our borders. And so I think the church is very challenged when it comes to the issue of human sexuality, because it's complex in the sense that we are dealing with issues of interpretation. When it comes to the interpreting of the scriptures, we are dealing with issues of tradition and culture, largely in the South African context. So the reason, I mean, you sent the question earlier, Natalie, about why is the church even complacent on this matter? Because the world is moving when it comes to the issue of human sexuality. The world is moving. We see it on our televisions, we see it in our series, we see it in our music. It's all over. And there's a level of embrace, there's a level of inclusivity, but the church seems to be lagging behind. I was very excited when I heard that Pope Francis made some statement, was it yesterday or today, about recognizing same-sex unions. And I thought, wow, that is exciting. But now we're going to have to wait another 500 years before we actually do something about it. as we said on Monday, like a mighty tortoise moves the church of God. Love that hymn, love it to bits. But it's frustrating in the sense that we're not keeping up, and we are not keeping up because we are not engaging the people on the ground. We're not engaging the world. Jesus challenged us. He says, "You're not of it, but you're in it." So adapt, and you really need to keep up with the times, because we are going to lose our relevance. And a practical example on the ground that I have here. I am a queer body in the Anglican Church, and the church does not have the lingo or the language with which to address me, this monster in the room, because we are so used to having single heterosexual males in the church, and they fly through the processes, and they move through the ranks and so on. But when it comes to someone who is other, within the context of the church, be you a member of the LGBTIQA plus community, be you a woman, then you sort of on the fringes, and your voice is silenced, or you are even just outrightly ignored. And that is a great challenge for the church. How this can change, as I said on Monday, that I don't think the church is going to change by a revolution. I really don't think so, because the structure of the church doesn't allow for it, doesn't allow for people burning tires in front of St. George's Cathedral because we want to recognize same-sex marriages. I mean, if that could happen, then we'll be there Monday. But I think the church is going to change by evolution, but we need to be intentional about it, which is again something I mentioned on Monday. It needs to be levels of intentionality. We need to be. I know the statement that was released by our female colleagues was that we need to be inclusive in terms of our language. We need to be engaging the people on the ground in terms of empowering them with the correct theological tools, the right interpretive tools. Show me a church that has done Bible studies during COVID-19. We could probably count them on our hands, on both our hands, where we're engaging our people with the scriptures, not just speaking to them from the pulpits on a Sunday, but interrogating the scriptures, using the hermeneutics of suspicion and all of the rest of it. But we need to be engaging the people on the ground. And I feel that there's that big disconnect with regards to our vision, because we say, people of the LGBTIQA plus community are full members of the church by virtue of their baptism. But the practicalities of that just doesn't seem to work out, because when a same-sex couple brings their baby to be baptized, we immediately sort of frown and think, can I refer this to another church? Or when they want to come and have their relationship solemnized in the church, we turn them away because we can't. And so yes, so there's a disconnect between our vision, what we say, and our praxis. And so that's a massive mammoth task, I think, with in terms of how we can address it. But there are the small steps, like the Pope who made his declaration yesterday was a small step for the church, but a giant step, I think, for the LGBTIQA plus community, because for the first time, the biggest denomination in the world has finally recognized the people on the fringes. And so obviously people are calling for the head of Pope Francis. But yeah, we pray for his protection and for more wisdom, just a double portion of wisdom to the Pope.
Emma, you had a question?
Yes, please. Nitano, thank you so much for sharing that with us. I'm not a queer body, so I don't speak presuming to have a certain positionality and understanding, which is why I want to ask you this question. How do you think the church has passed certain scriptures as I would like to call plasters over the fringe problem, instead of addressing the issues? So how do you distinguish between when the church is taking a small step and when they are actually making excuses? Because I've seen people use the scripture, we in the world, not of the world, to sort of be like, okay, I won't overtly stigmatize this queer body in front of you, but when I get them, I'm going to talk about them with my family and say, oh my word, why are they in church, blah, 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 blah. You know? So how do we have this cultural shift when addressing queer bodies and actually seeing them as not of the world, but of the church?
Yeah.
How do we do that? You know,
Sure.
like do that unlearning, you know, especially when the majority of decision makers are cis het males.
Yes. Thanks, Emma. Thanks for that. I love it. Emma and I we can have a weekend away, Emma, and discuss this.
15 now.
Yes. Brilliant question. You know, and again, I speak from my embodied experience, right? I asked myself the question, why do I even want to belong to a group of people that ostracizes? You know, why do I even want to work for them full time? They're my bread and butter. It's crazy. And I kind of made a personal choice to again, I say that, you know, it's not going to change from the outside, because I mean, you know, any institution, when it's being criticized, like the government or whatever the case may be, is sort of very, people can be saying all sorts of things on the outskirts, but they won't really take you seriously. And I thought, if I'm from the inside and I'm a voice amongst other voices, because there are certainly other voices on the inside of the church who are really making a noise, who are really rattling the feathers, who are bringing this up all the time, making sure that this is something that we discuss. It's at the forefront of our discussions, because it is as important as GBV. It is as important as climate change and all the rest of it. But in terms of your question about how do we make this paradigm shift in terms of our thinking, I think I mean, that's also quite a complex one, but I think one of the first steps we need to take is to equip our leaders. Our leaders don't have the vocabulary with which to deal with their own issues around their own embodied selves. You know, we don't have, as part of the training of clergy, and I mean, I was fairly recently trained, a section of our training where we talk about, are you comfortable in your own skin with who you are, you know, before you can go out and lead a congregation of people? Because that's when we walk into those spaces, which are sacred spaces, holy spaces, and we corrupt them, you know, we corrupt them with our interpretations of scripture. We corrupt them with our methodology of leadership, because we believe this is what is right, when we haven't been exposed to otherness. And so I really feel that the church needs to be intentional about its training of its clergy. It needs to be intentional about its empowerment of its people, so that we aren't, as I said, Sunday heavy people, where we just sort of exegete texts on a Sunday morning and expect that that's enough. We need to give our people the tools with which to take the scriptures and to love them, to interrogate them, and to take what is good out of them. Because not everything, I mean, I'm sure we can all agree, not everything in the Bible is good. There are some stories in the scriptures that are terrible, horrible things that should never ever be repeated again. But what do we take from those stories in order to, you know, in order to live out our faith in our daily lives? So yeah, Emma, I'm probably obviously just scratching that on the surface, but I'm hoping that I at least address a part of your question.
You did. Thank you very much. I just have one follow-up question to that. You've mentioned how, sorry man, you mentioned how
I told you, weekend away.
How else can, let's say, because you've mentioned institutionally how we can bring about change, and how you can be an accountable constituent of your positionality to bring about change within, you know, within the church community itself. But how can, let's say, the average member of the church, right, who might not necessarily have the same positionality as you, because often people have similar positionalities then band together. How can we have a bigger support for not only the LGBTQI plus community, but also for those who are representing those communities, and to hold them accountable for when they try and maybe sway to just sort of buck under to the status quo, and actually hold them accountable without, for example, overstepping our position, the limits of our positionality, and also just support you in any way we can.
Thanks, Emma. I loved. I walked into a church in the United States when I visited a few years ago, and there was a massive sign that two what do you call these panel posters kind of things, not flyers, they were posters that said there were two images of I think it was David and Jonathan and Naomi and Ruth. If you're familiar with them, you're probably familiar with the biblical characters. And underneath it had the caption that said, "All are welcome here." This is now in the United States, I mean, 4 years ago or something. And I thought to myself, as an Anglican, we are very visual, right? We take our cues from visual cues, from what we see, the aesthetics of the church. I'm convinced that our churches can make great progress if we all just begin by creating safe spaces, by create, just by our visual cues. We don't need to say anything, but just by the aesthetic that we create in our church buildings, by making sure that our pastor or the priest is just gay friendly, so that I can go and have a conversation there with him, or even the guy at the door who's greeting. Is he equipped to deal with the question that I may have, because I might not be able to speak with anyone. Again, the church needs to be intentional about what we put into place in order to make spaces safe for people, on the margins, as we would call it. Being a cradle Anglican myself, and growing up in an Anglican church, my lived experience is that the auntie in the Mothers Union, she was so much more welcoming than the lay preacher who preached on a Sunday morning and preached fire and brimstone. I think we have gems in our people, in the people that make up our congregations, and they don't even know it. I'm convinced if we just made a call one day and said, we are gathering on Friday night, and we're gonna have a cup of coffee, and we're gonna be talking some about some issues, and intentionally get those people like Mothers Union auntie and that sides person around the table, we would be able to move mountains, and just create safe spaces in the church. I don't think the people on the ground realize the significance of the role that they have in the pews, because they're just not conscientized about it. We move through this very consumerist kind of understanding of church, and so I move to church on a Sunday, I get what I need, and I leave. And as you said, we need to reconceptualize this understanding of church, as opposed to it being a petrol station, that I go and refuel myself at. But as community, that the church is a community. This is we exist for each other, and I think once we get that right, we're gonna be struggling. We're gonna be struggling for a long time.
Nitano, I've got a question for you here quickly.
Sure.
One of the things we also touched on has been servant leadership.
Yeah.
And, just off the back of what you said, are we missing humility in our leadership? Are we missing servitude? Are we missing the Jesus way, basically, of how to bring about this change? Have we become this cookie cutter petrol station, fast food joint,
Yeah. Drive through.
Yeah, drive through, come back Monday.
Drive by blessings, yeah.
Then we
suddenly have a lot to say. Absolutely. I agree with you 125,000%, Tim, in that I think we've lost the plot. We really have lost the plot. And you put it quite nicely to say that, have we lost the Jesus way? Bishop Michael Curry, who is the presiding bishop in the United States, again, I just love the Episcopal Church, but he's, as part of his tenure now as the presiding bishop, he has this thing, of the Jesus way, or the Jesus movement, this reconceptualizing of church, that we are a movement for change in the world. You know, we are not this building of a museum of holy people, as someone once said. You know, but we this movement that can effect tremendous change. I think it was Emma that also mentioned earlier, you know, that the church has been for a long time, I mean, over centuries, an institution that has been, you know, part of the enforcement of rules and laws, and we've become comfortable with that. When in fact, if we go back to the earliest concept of church, which met in the homes of believers, again, there's this thing of family, you know, this thing of us together, community in this. If we go back to that understanding of church, which I think COVID has really shaken us up, if we think about, you know, COVID-19 and the lockdown, it has really shaken the church up into, I won't say we got it completely right, but I think it's helping us reconceptualize that I can pray in my home, that I can do something where I am, you know, me as an individual, but also as a family. But did we hold on to that? The minute the president said we are going to level 1, everybody was saying, yes, I can go back to church. And so what? For what? So that you can be a consumer again. So you can just go back into that space, get what you need and leave. But COVID-19 kind of forced us into social action to help those who are around us, to the family member that just lost their job, you know, helping our kids with schoolwork. Even that was sort of reignited in families. And I don't want to say thank God for COVID, but I mean, at least as part of what the lockdown and all of that has brought onto us, I really think the church has the ideal opportunity to run with us. But I'm almost certain that we're going to fall back into the rut and say, okay, now we can stop our online engagements. We can go back to in-person worship. Just make sure you bring your tithing.
What museum was that you were saying?
About the what now?
You were saying the church can sometimes be a what type of museum?
A museum for the holy.
Nice.
Yeah.
Keenan, you had a question. Sorry, you put up your hand there. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I just really want to emphasize that question of how do we take this opportunity that we have now? Nitano's really, I think, given us lots of great examples. I like the idea of a coffee on a Friday. And just, I think it's an open question to the group. And I think even to the people that are watching, like, how do we not fall into the trap of going back to that Sunday heavy, consumer style, one person from the front feeds everyone way of church? What are some of the ways that we can be sort of more reflecting a community that doesn't only meet for 2 to 2.5 hours on a Sunday, but can do so much more during the week? Yeah, how do we not miss this opportunity now and just fall back into the old normal?
You want to take that one, Nitano? Or yeah, who wants to?
I'll just comment and say that I think a lot of the power actually rests with the people who are sitting at home and with the people who are the few people who have started coming back to church. Like those are our constituents. These are our people. We you know, I think one of my biggest frustrations is that we don't engage enough with the church community. Like our constituents have said, okay, to the pastorate or to the parish council, you can make all the decisions for us. But actually, that's not how it should be. That's not how I would want it to be. Because it's then we're giving the power to a small group of people, and we're happy with that, and complacency sets in, and that's not. I mean, each and every one of us is a disciple of Jesus Christ, and each and every one of us should be doing our bit, wherever it is. The good, do your bit wherever you are. It's not up to one person or up to the church leadership or up to the people who wear purple shirts. it's each and every one of us.
I think to comment on what Keenan has said, what do we do going forward? Do we go back to our old norm? Do we stay with our new norm? I think this platform that we have is something that we should continue, and I think we've mentioned it in our previous conversation. Continue the conversation. If it's online, if you do it once a month, whatever, however we do it, but continue in this way. I know that we can't make a difference in everybody's life, but I mean, Natalie, you can really testify to this, that we touched at least one woman's life with conversations like this. Then there was another woman who actually reached out, and it's because they watched this platform. So something like this is something that I think we as St. Philip's is a very small community, but something like this is something that has touched that community. One or two people is a lot. So it's a lot bigger than nothing. So I think continue on platforms like this, and maybe like just invite that auntie that's just not part of the regular conversations. Once in a while, invite somebody different, and maybe then you maybe attract more people.
Charmaine, I actually just want to comment on something that you've said there now, in terms of the impact that is being made. I actually shared this with Lynette the other day, is that, and to God be the glory for the two women's lives that have been touched. The one thing that stands out for me, just in terms of the forum that we're having today and the great contributions by Emma and Nitano, is just the fellowship itself. Being able to actually engage on something, hearing someone's different perspective on the item is already, in a small way, which can become a big way, a step in the right direction in terms of how we view scripture, in terms of bringing us back to the simplicity of who Jesus was and the way in which he did things, and where that emanated from, out of love. A lot of what we've spoken about tonight has been man-made structures and systems and things that we've put in place, claiming that this is the function of the church, and this is the but it's, if you actually digest it and you actually look at its relevance today, it's actually quite far removed from what Jesus set out to do. So just to talk about impact, I think, just having these conversations and hopefully they become more frequent. I think it's powerful, because it forces us to also ask these same questions of ourselves, in terms of gender-based violence or sexual orientation or family values, and that's possibly where a lot of the healing starts in a society like South Africa. I don't know if there are any other thoughts, guys. I know I'm aware of time. Reverend, any thoughts from your side? Yeah, or anyone else?
No, not from me. I'm thrilled. I think that we've had some really good interaction this evening. And yeah, I just want to thank Emma and Nitano for making the time and for being available, and just for sharing with us. I hope that you felt welcomed and in this space, because we've appreciated having you with us.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to meet everyone, and thank you for making me feel welcome. I hope this speaks to people. So I appreciate the opportunity, and it's nice to see you again, Rev.
Thank you, Natalie, and the team for the invitation to to just share with you. I must commend St. Philip's on this. I mean, I just latching on to what Charmaine was saying now, you know, one of the practical things that you can do to not go back to the old normal is to keep this kind of platform going, and to really engage. Because again, Tim, you know, Jesus didn't change the world by converting crowds of people. He spoke to people like this, you know, like one-on-one. And I think this is an opportunity for the church to regain that kind of ministry where we engage people, meet them where they are, and I think we'll change the world, and not want the world come to the church so that we can, you know, effect change, but actually for us to go out there and to really just remind people that they are loved, that they are welcomed by God as they are, and nothing is broken. As Emma said, I love that. Nothing is broken. The church will meet you where you are and will remind you that you have worth, infinite worth, where you are. So thank you to the people of St. Philip's. Thank you to Reverend Natalie and to the leadership for providing this kind of platform. And may God continue to just use you powerfully in the interwebs and in the world.
Amen.
Amen.